order. So I'll have you both go on mute, please. So I will call the special meeting of Wednesday, July 24th, 2024 to order and begin with the land acknowledgement that the City of Fort Saskatchewan is located within Treaty 6 territory in Métis Nation of Alberta, District 11. We recognize we stand upon the land that carries the footsteps of many Indigenous people, including the Nihilwak, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Métis, and the city honors the First Peoples of this land and is committed to fostering reconciliation through relationship building, knowledge gathering, and education. Thank you. And as I indicated, this is a special meeting, and when a special meeting is called to order, there is only one item on the agenda because it's time sensitive or urgent. So with that, I will ask, there's nobody in the audience for delegations and nobody has pre-registered. So we will go directly to the business arising from the special meeting, the Extended Producer Responsibility Servicing Model. Sadie Miller presenting.
Good morning, Your Worship and Council. My name is Sadie Miller, Director of the Utilities and Sustainability Department, and I'm here today to request a decision from Council related to the province's Extended Producer Responsibility Regulations. The decision Council makes today will determine what servicing model the City of Fort Saskatchewan will proceed with on April 1st, 2025, when the regulations are operationalized. Extended Producer Responsibility, otherwise referred to as EPR, is a regulation that came into force at the end of November 2022. This regulation is intended to shift the costs of recycling away from municipalities and to the producers who physically design and distribute these items. Alberta's regulation has two groups of included materials: single-use plastic, packaging, and paper products, referred to as PPP, and some hazardous materials, which are reflected in the regulations as Household Special Products, or HSP. The information relayed to Council today relates to PPP materials only. In the City of Fort Saskatchewan, these materials are generated and managed by the City in three areas: curbside blue bag collection, front-load multifamily residential collection, and general recycling bins at the Transfer and Eco Station. There are a lot of organizations involved in the creation and implementation of this EPR regulation. After the Government of Alberta created the regulation itself, they designated the Alberta Recycling Management Authority, referred to as ARMA, as the oversight body. ARMA took the information contained in the regulations and created a series of bylaws and policies to better define the process for how the goals within the regulation would be achieved. From this process, producer responsibility organizations, or PROs, were approved by ARMA. PROs are non-profit organizations that contract directly with producers to help them meet their obligations under the EPR regulation. The approved PRO for PPP in Alberta is Circular Materials, and they represent many producers such as Nestle, Loblaw, Costco, and Procter & Gamble, among others. To ensure the producers they represent can meet their regulatory requirements, Circular Materials needs to secure collection, hauling, and processing contracts for PPP materials across Alberta, and they are required to do this by their mandated implementation deadline of April 1st, 2025. To do this, Circular Materials has identified two options: contract with municipalities or hire a third-party collector. This is where municipalities come in, and this is where a decision from Fort Saskatchewan is required. The two options that Circular Materials presented to all participating municipalities in Alberta are opt-in or opt-out. A deadline of August 1st, 2024 was given to all municipalities wishing to participate in Phase 1 of EPR in 2025. With the opt-in option, Fort Saskatchewan would continue to manage our current recycling service providers and would become a contractor to Circular Materials. The benefit of choosing this option is that our residents would experience a seamless transition into EPR. Everything from collection schedules, container type, customer service touchpoints, and communications would continue status quo. With the opt-in option, Circular Materials has mandated that municipalities provide a series of financial statements, liability insurance, contamination management plans, and monthly reporting requirements to ensure reimbursement of recycling costs is received. Should Council choose this option, 2 temporary full-time staff requests will be recommended to Council during the 2025 operating budget deliberations. 1 position to track and report on required data, as well as author, implement, and monitor related management plans, and a 2nd position to ensure consistent monitoring of general recycling bins as possible during the transfer and eco-station's operating hours. With the opt-out option, Fort Saskatchewan would hand over the recycling programs to Circular Materials and be mostly removed from these administrative activities. Circular Materials would be responsible for finding and managing contractors to provide the services to our community. The main benefit of choosing this option is that we could remove the costs associated with collection, hauling, and processing of recyclables in the community. It's a guaranteed financial return that doesn't require reports or monitoring to receive. The biggest risk with the opt-out option is the uncertainty surrounding servicing. Residents may be impacted by a change in collection schedule, poor communication and customer service, or service disruptions during the transition. Administration is still working closely with Circular Materials to determine what costs will be reimbursed to our utility rate payers as a result of EPR. Based on our current best guess, it is projected that the net savings for the opt-in option will be $260,000 a year after you factor in temporary staffing costs to oversee the transition. A savings of $400,000 a year is projected for the opt-out option. Utilities and Sustainability strives to provide excellent customer service to our community, and for that reason, administration recommends that Council choose the opt-in service model with Circular Materials. This option provides certainty to our community that the recycling service they have become familiar with will remain unchanged as the province shifts to EPR. This option also offers the municipality some flexibility and choice for the future. If Council decides to opt in, the choice can be made at a later date to opt out once trust in the system and contractors has been established. This same flexibility does not exist with the opt-out option. Communities who opt out on October 1st are not able to opt in later. I know that's a lot of information at once, so I'm available for any questions Council may have.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation. I will open it up for questions. I'm sure there'll be lots. Your button. Councillor Kelly.
It's already been 4 weeks and I forget how to press the button, Mayor Catcher. Sadie, you haven't convinced me that it's worth the extra $140,000 to be a part of to keep our finger in the pie. I don't see that as being necessarily seamless either, because there's got to be a point of contact between our city and our contractors and the new service provider. Anything else you can share that would help me think that your suggested path is the correct one?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, when we look at the worst case scenario for the opt-in option, it's that we're not seeing a financial benefit right away. We can guarantee that services will continue as planned because we are in control of that contractor and we have that touch point with residents. This recommendation prioritizes predictable servicing over immediate financial benefit.
The mandate of the new organization is to provide collection service on a specific date, is it not?
Through your worship, the mandate is to, yes, take over the processing of all recyclable materials in the province, as well as financially reimburse municipalities for their associated costs. So the onus would be on the City of Fort Saskatchewan to justify our associated costs. And that's where Circular Materials is reaching out to communities for more data and more information to ensure that we are justifying basically every dollar that we're asking them for.
One more question, but if we turn it over to them, we avoid all of that conflict. We don't have to justify anything. Is that not correct?
Through your worship, that is correct. They take over all of the collection, hauling, and disposal of our recyclable materials.
I'll come back in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm next in the speaking order. So what happens at the transfer station then? Because we have the bins currently. So do they pay for the bins then and then just come in and haul them away?
Your worship, the EcoStation component is a big question mark for us right now, as Circular Materials, the Pro, has not approved our EcoStation as a collection site yet. And this is typical of their process throughout Alberta. They've been visiting sites and they just haven't had the time or capacity to come to Fort Saskatchewan. We do not have a definitive answer on whether or not our EcoStation is going to be a collection site for Circular Materials yet. The council report you have today assumes that we are going to be approved. But if that isn't approved, the City of Fort Saskatchewan would maintain all associated costs and staffing requirements, and that request for the temporary transfer station attendant position would not be brought forward to council.
Okay. And then the second one, so we currently have the contractor that goes around and picks up the recyclable. So that would come off our contract and they would contract it out themselves?
Your worship, yes. So we currently have 2 contractors collecting recyclable materials. We have one contractor for blue bag recycling at the curbside level, and we have a second contractor at the multifamily residential level collecting the dumpster type bins.
Okay, I'll come back. Councillor Batoye, you're next.
Thank you for your presentation, Sadie. So could there be potentially additional costs as a result of going to the opt-in option outside of the staffing costs you indicated in the report?
Through your worship to Councillor Abatoye, we don't anticipate any additional costs outside of that staffing request or recommendation. The bulk of the extra work is administrative in nature. So based on the information that we currently know, and the situation and information evolves every week, but we don't believe any additional costs would be associated to this option.
Okay. So one of the reasons I like the opt-in option is they're keeping it to the contamination rate to 4%. Now, is there some sort of would there be an issue if we're not able to meet with that rate? And what kind of specific measures are we going to be implementing as a result in order to achieve that 4%?
Through your worship, council will be receiving an update from the recent waste audit that we just did. So this is preliminary information. We haven't received the final report, but at present, it looks like our current contamination rate in our blue bag stream is around 18%.
1/8?
1/8%. Wow. So to get to 4% requires a lot of work and a lot of communication, which contributes to that temporary staffing ask. We anticipate if we do go with the opt-in option, we absolutely will need to create a contamination management plan. And that primarily focuses, I believe, on audits and communication, just at a high level without looking into that further. And what Circular Materials has mandated is that opt-in communities with a contamination management plan just need to demonstrate that they're working towards decreasing that contamination level.
So no penalties?
There are no penalties, no.
All right, thank you. I'll come back.
Okay, Councillor Harris, you're next.
Sadie, talk to us about this company, Circular Materials. Who are they, what they are, how long have they been around? How can we be convinced that they are indeed a serious player here? They've been vetted by the province, I would imagine, but how do we know that they are indeed a credible source for this particular type of service?
Through your worship to Councillor Harris, I can't answer some of your questions. I'm not sure exactly when they were established, but Circular Materials is the pro for most provinces in Canada for their EPR programs. Circular Materials represents basically any major producer that would come to your mind when you think of products that you buy on the shelf. So they do have very strong representation, very strong funding, and on an administrative level, their team has been really great to work with. But yeah, I think that's all I can say about Circular Materials specifically. They kind of are the leader in this area.
Okay, so what you're telling us is they have the critical mass to be able to deliver the service, and for us to be able to have a kind of an enduring relationship with them through the provincial program is kind of what you're suggesting.
Through your worship, yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. I'll have another question.
Okay, I'll put you on for round 2. Or you're good?
Yeah, I guess I only asked one. So my second question, though, is with this 4% contamination rate, if they were dealing with the program themselves, they'd have to pick up whatever's at the curb in whatever sort of manner they'd be picking it up. And so contamination would not be our issue. It would be up to the company to ultimately educate the community in terms of what's acceptable and what's not. Is that a reasonable assumption, Sadie?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so the opt-out would mean that they're responsible for everything and we can wash our hands of it if that were the case. Okay, well, that's good. Good news to know. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blizzard, you're next.
Hi, Sadie. Thanks for the presentation and all the information. So, and maybe this is just for anyone even listening, but by reading it through, we really only have 2 options, right? Opt in and opt out.
Through your worship to Councillor Blizzard, yes, that's correct.
Okay. I have a whole bunch of questions, but I'll start with a couple. So if the recycle station is not approved, then could it be shut down?
Through your worship to Councillor Blizzard, in theory, we could remove the general recycling bins from the eco station should council choose to do that. There are a lot of other services, recycling and garbage-wise, at that site that our community and surrounding municipalities do depend on. So without looking into it further, I wouldn't recommend that option, but it could definitely be something to explore.
I didn't mean council shutting it down. You had said it's not yet approved. So could this recycle company shut it down if they decide not to approve it? Like shut part of it down, the part that isn't approved for them?
Through your worship, no. The city of Fort Saskatchewan would just continue to fund that service. We just wouldn't receive financial reimbursement.
Okay. Okay, I guess I've got a couple. I've got more, so I'll let somebody else go now.
Okay. Go ahead and, just a second. Yeah, I'll put you on for round 2. Councillor Kelly, you're next.
Councillor Harris touched on the question I wanted to ask about the contamination rate. If we opt out, that becomes the service provider's problem and not ours. Is that correct?
To my understanding, that is correct, yes.
If we opt in and we don't meet the contamination threshold, what happens?
Through your worship, there is no penalty. We just have to demonstrate that we are actively trying to reduce that rate.
And that requires an extra staff person according to your plan right now.
Through your worship, our experience in decreasing contamination is that it is very administrative and communication heavy, which our current waste program supervisor does not have capacity to take on.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Abatoye.
Thank you. So the cost savings, where is that coming from? From the 400,000, is that coming from just our current services, so we don't need to spend that money anymore? Where's that coming from?
Through your worship to Councillor Abatoye, we are still working with circular materials to really define what is included in the reimbursement and what isn't. The $400,000 that is presented to council today is just the collection and processing costs that the city currently pays.
Okay, got it. Thank you. So just back to the opt-out option. So whether it's the opt-in or opt-out option, we're still going to have service disruptions, right? The only difference is that with the opt-in option, administration is able to manage communication with the residents. That's the main difference.
Through your worship, I don't anticipate any service disruptions with the opt-in option. It's status quo in terms of our administration of the contractor. With the opt-out option, we are passing that responsibility to circular materials and relying on them to align contracts and collection schedules and route planning for our community before April 1st, 2025.
So with the opt-in option, we're still working with circular materials.
Through your worship, yes. The city of Fort Saskatchewan will work directly with circular materials. With the opt-out option, circular materials works directly with the contractor.
So just one more question. So if, for example, they're going to change the days of bin collection, it's still going to be the same regardless of the model we'll go with. So basically, okay, I'll let you speak.
Through your worship, the regulation mandates that circular materials collect blue bags in the community at least every other week, which is our current service level.
Right. So again, it's the difference is really in the way administration communicates with the residents, because the contractor or circular material is still the same vendor in both options, right?
Through your worship, yes, they are involved in both options.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Harris, you're next.
So I'm just trying to understand, because I'm almost leaning towards the opt-out option and removing ourselves from the responsibility of it. We can say that we have this responsibility, but ultimately it's a provincial responsibility, and they have a contractor that's prepared to do it. So I'm just trying to understand, moving in that direction and ultimately having them be responsible for the communication to residents, because that ultimately is their job under this new regulation legislation. Is that a fair assumption, Sadie?
Through your worship to Councillor Harris, yes.
Yeah, at some point we have to kind of step away from non-municipal responsibilities. And up to this point in time, obviously waste and waste collection and those sorts of things have fallen on the municipality. But the costs are increasing. And, I guess ultimately speaking, I'm almost at the point where let's focus on the things that are our responsibility and our responsibility alone. And solid waste and, compostables and stuff like that are the things that ultimately will remain our responsibility. So, okay, well, I'll ponder that. I'm kind of on the fence on this one. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Macon. You're next.
Thank you. I'm kind of leaning toward the opt-out as well. And where I think, struggling is, the comment was, I think, the question was already asked about, I apologize, I'm losing my train of thought. Please come back to me, sorry.
Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Blizzard.
Try not to lose my train of thought. There's just a lot of information here, so I get it. So the main reason for opting in is, now I see my picture is a little blurry, hope you can see it, would be for continuity for all the residents. Is that the fear that if we opt out, that there may be some service disruptions?
Through your worship to Councillor Blizzard, yes, that is our fear, and that fear, I would argue, is not unfounded. Circular materials, like I mentioned previously, has taken over operations in other jurisdictions across Canada. And we've, to be fairly blunt, heard some horror stories about lack of collection for months just because of the sheer amount of work that they are required to get done in such a short amount of time. So administration's recommendation for the opt-in option was to make sure that services continue while things ramp up with EPR, knowing that we can, with 18 months notice, opt out at any point.
Your Worship, if I could weigh in here, I just want to provide a little bit more context behind the recommendation and maybe summarize things a bit for Council. Both options are viable. We can make both options work, and we're happy to move forward with the preference of Council. Our concern and primary justification for recommending opt-in was to maintain control of customer service. Every 2 weeks, the city has disposal 3 times at 10,000 properties. So there's 30,000 transactions every 2 weeks, which works out to about $750,000 a year. If you assume 1% of those transactions go wrong, that's 7,500 requests that come in from residents for this one program area. The actual numbers are much lower than that, but the majority of FORT reports that we receive do come from waste. We have some very talented clerks who have been doing this for a while. They know the community well. They know how we've handled these issues as they pop up. So they work with the residents to resolve these concerns, and the vast majority, they can work directly with the resident and fix the problem. We believe that circular materials can probably get to that point, but as of April 1st next year, they're going to be transitioning a lot of municipalities at the same time. Our recommendation is to let them move forward with this transition, work out the kinks for a few years. We'll observe how things go in the other municipalities, and when it gets to the point where we have confidence that we can transition without service interruptions and without loss of quality for that customer service component, then we could move forward. To transition to opt out after you've opted in takes 18 months. Our contract with the service providers ends in 2028. So we would have about 6 months to a year to observe and evaluate and make a decision as to whether or not we want to transition at the end of that contract. It's just a strategy that allows us to kind of walk slowly into this transition as opposed to ripping off the Band-Aid and moving fast. There is a financial cost associated with that walk slowly approach, but we believe it's the best way to manage customer service issues.
Did you have another one, Councillor Blizzard?
Yes, thank you for all that information. That really kind of confirms that the one to me looks better, but we're still in the question period. So looking at the numbers, either way, we're actually saving, right? So when we're talking about the cost, it's just that we don't save as much going with the opt-in versus the opt-out, correct?
Through your worship, that's correct.
Okay. I just got one more, I think, if I can ask that.
Go ahead.
Are we do they have a control or say then if it's going to be bags or bins? Because I know we did quite a study on what the blue bins should be, and we went with the bags due to spacing. Could that all be changed around by this company?
Through your worship to Councillor Blizzard, yes, they would have authority to determine what container type is used for collection.
Okay, I'll leave the rest for once the motion's on the table.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Macon.
Yes, sorry. And Councillor Blizzard did ask more clearly what I was going to ask, so I do appreciate the response I did get to the question I was trying to say. Sadie, in regards to like the horror stories you're talking about, we have a contractor. Does Circular Materials continue to use our contractor, or only until the contract is over and then they bring in their own trucks? How does that work?
Through your worship to Councillor Macon, it would be their choice.
Okay. And then the horror stories that you're referring to, are these communities that already had recycling services that was being taken over, or communities that have like a brand new program that they're trying to step up?
Through your worship, they were mid-sized municipalities similar to Fort Saskatchewan, primarily in Ontario and BC, that the servicing was just unpredictable for a few months.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm next in the speaking order. Question for you. So you say temporary staff. How long's temporary?
Your worship, as long until we opt out, I would say.
So permanent.
To your worship, there are limits on how long we can hire temporary employees. So there would be a natural termination point. You could renew or extend, work with People Services to extend that duration, but we'd have to be sensitive to that. Our thought was to bring these people in as we navigate the implementation. We do think the workload will be heavier at the onset and then level off later on after the transition. So I don't expect it will be permanent. I would think a year or two.
Okay, my next question. If we're sitting at 18% contamination after, I'm going to say 25 years of recycling, what makes us think more education is going to get people to actually reduce the contamination?
Your worship, I believe a lot of this contamination is a result of the change to the acceptable items that was made a few years ago. If council recalls, there were processing changes where a lot of film plastic and flexible plastics were considered no longer recyclable. So that is the bulk of our contamination rate. If we looked at a blue bag today with the acceptable list compared to 10 years from now, that contamination rate would probably be more 5% because it's a lot of film plastics. But because those are considered contaminants now, it bumps up that contamination rate. Our communication hasn't been as aggressive recently as it was when we started the Fort Sask Waste Program in 2018. So this would give us an opportunity to revisit that communication strategy and maybe engage with residents a little bit more than we have in the last couple of years.
Okay, thanks. And last question that I'll have. So our existing contractor, is there a penalty if we do the opt out? Is there a penalty that we have to pay to the existing contractor if we're releasing them?
Your worship, so administration actually pre-planned for EPR and ended the recycling portion of the contract right before EPR starts. So we have two options. We can opt in and extend that recycling portion of their agreement, or we can opt out and pass the buck to Circular Materials.
Okay, great. Thank you. Councillor Kelly?
Thank you. Mayor Katcher just asked one of my questions. The bad experiences that happened with a transition in Ontario, for instance, it would seem to me that as this organization marches across Canada, province by province, that its skill set ought to improve. Would that be a fair assumption?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, I would assume so.
So what if we opt in, we still have to be part of the process. And if the process doesn't work, it's just not going to work. So what happens if we collect all of the blue bags and we have no place to deliver them, and where do they pile up in the intervening period? Because we're collecting them, there's got to be a contact point someplace. So how does that work if we're collecting?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, the one very definitive point of the regulation was that Circular Materials is obligated to identify a processor for this material. So we will have a designated processor and a designated site where we must take this material to.
We don't know where that is yet.
Through your worship, Circular Materials has not sent out those requests for proposals yet.
And Mayor Katcher touched on my other point. I'd just like to get back to it for a second, the contamination rate. I think there's always going to be a problem there, but that's my personal opinion. I think if we're, what's stopping Circular Materials from changing their rules from show us your plan to, okay, now it's time for you to actually produce on your plan and introduce penalties if we don't make the contamination rates that they want?
Through your worship, there is a statement of work and a municipal servicing agreement that would be signed with all opt-in communities by October 31st. And once that's signed, it's an agreement. They can't change that.
Have we seen that agreement?
We have seen drafts. They are still making some amendments based on feedback that was provided by communities on July 10th.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Harris, you're next.
Two questions. In the last term of council, a number of us attended to the company in the west end of Edmonton where the recyclable materials were handled. And I think the company that was ultimately taken was a company in China, and they had an inspector there, and the inspector was ultimately sampling each load that would come in. Is that the process that's still in effect and at that same plant? Is that where our collection contractor is taking that material for sorting and ultimately disposition to wherever it goes in Asian economy, wherever it is? Is that how it's being handled still, Sadie?
Through your worship to Councillor Harris, unfortunately, the site that council visited a few years ago has since burnt down and is no longer operational. We currently take our blue bag materials to a facility called Capital Paper. They do process some more valuable materials domestically, but then they ship others south into the US, actually. So from there, we're not entirely sure where they go, but the primary markets for these materials still reside in Asia. With that being said, the EPR regulation is intended to create more domestic markets and more of a circular economy system within Canada. So that is one of the driving factors behind this regulation itself.
Yeah. Obviously, we have to make our own decision, but have you heard of any other major municipalities in the province faced with the same decision we're having to make, and whether they've decided to opt in and opt out? Like, for example, the city of Edmonton, Calgary, Red Deer, Lethbridge. I'm in Lethbridge right now, and I know that they're doing different things to try to resolve their contamination issue with blue bins, and they've got the bins, and they've got issues where you can't actually look into them. They're apparently going to a camera system, I heard yesterday. So have we heard about any other decisions relative to other municipalities in the province and where they're going?
Through your worship, administration does engage with other municipalities across Alberta about EPR weekly at this point. And the only community that has made a definitive decision that I'm aware of is Morinville, I believe, and they chose to opt out. Other communities are still trying to get some information so that they have, actual financials and the cost analysis to provide to council.
Yeah, and those are prudent decisions to make, and obviously you've framed it for us in that context as well. Okay, well, thanks for that. Okay, good.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Batoye.
I'm prepared to make the motion, so I see Councillor Kelly chimed in. So
Okay, yeah, we still have a couple more questions, but I'll just make a note and come back to you for a motion. I'm next in the speaking order. So if we go with the opt-out, is it going to be just the status quo of items that we can put in? Or are we looking at, they're going to add the glass? Are we ever going to see styrofoam? Like, are we going to see more that's going to go into it?
Your Worship, Circular Materials is responsible for providing that comprehensive list of what is included and what isn't included. They've committed to providing that prior to the April 1st start date, but we do not have that information now.
So I guess the question that I have, if we go with either one of these and they don't live up to the standard that we expect, how can we hold them accountable then? I mean, they could come back and say, well, we're only taking paper and the hard plastic.
Through your worship, the regulation itself actually prohibits that level of scrutiny in the acceptable list. The regulation does state a minimum percentage of recovery required based on stream. So glass is included in the regulation. Film plastics, which we have removed from our blue bags, I believe is mandated like a recovery of at least 25% in the first year of the program. So we are expecting actually items to be added onto our acceptable list. We're just not sure what that looks like yet.
Okay, and that's what they would have to accept.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Councillor Kelly, round 4.
If we opt in, we would continue to, well, we would renew, I guess, our contract with our current service provider. That cost then would be reimbursed by Circular Materials?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, yes, that is the intent.
And have they set any guidelines as to what we are allowed to spend per capita that they would reimburse for?
Through your worship, they distributed a mock compensation model, which administration is working closely with Circular Materials to try to really define what is covered and what isn't. At a bare minimum, all processing costs are required to be covered, and disposal or collection and hauling costs as well. There's other indirect costs that the regulation states they have to cover, but we're still trying to work through those details.
But it doesn't give any city or municipality carte blanche approval to negotiate any contract that they wish. There's got to be some guidelines with Circular Materials, their expectation of what a reasonable contract would look like and what the terms of or cost of a reasonable contract would be.
Through your worship, the municipal servicing agreement draft that I spoke of earlier is their agreement, so we do have a general idea of what it says. Most communities are hesitant for the opt-out option because the regulation only mandates every other week recycling collection. So the communities that currently provide weekly blue bag collection may not get all of their disposal costs covered. But fortunately, Fort Saskatchewan is not in that situation. We already have every other week recycling collection. Therefore, we feel that all of these disposal or collection and hauling costs will be covered because that is the regulatory requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to you, Councillor Batoye, for a motion. We'll see where we go.
thank you. I'll make a motion that council directs administration to register the city of Fort Saskatchewan for the opt-in servicing model with Circular Materials for single-use products, packaging, and paper products under the Extended Producer Responsibility Program.
Okay, I'll accept the motion. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's before us. It's we have a crucial decision to make about the recycle future of our city. And I think really it's a decision on whether we want to control our destiny or not. I think we've heard a number of things that administration has talked about continuity and continuing the program and the service level we currently have, and customer service and accountability, to our residents. I think that's really important as we move forward with this program. And I think for me, the two major reasons I'm going forward with this opt-in option is number one, I like that it's going to hold us accountable to be more environmentally friendly or sustainable, and make sure that we minimize, the contamination rates and increase our diversion rates. I hope I got that right. I think that's number one. Number two is the flexibility in service. Is that it's not the end all be all, like the opt out option. Like we can still decide that, okay, this is not working for us. We want to go for move to the other option, or maybe that's a better option for us based on what we've seen. I also like the idea that we're going to be getting a lot of data that will help us, make strategic decisions about our recycling program. And I also like the fact that we can continue to engage with our community. Imagine, and I really like the data you mentioned, Janelle, 7,500. And I'm not sure, are those real numbers or is that an assumption?
That would be an assumption that 1% of tips don't go as planned.
Right. Okay. So, assuming we had that number, it's just going to be crazy. And we don't want to see that kind of situation in our community. So I think that the opt-in option will be the best option for us to go forward. And I hope council will support it.
Okay. Thank you. I've got Councillor Harris first on discussion and debate.
As I said earlier, what's that?
No, on discussion and debate.
Yeah. I said earlier that I was on the fence on this one, but I'm leaning more towards the opt-out. And I'm doing so. I can see the value in the opt-in because it gives us the flexibility to go forward. But at some point in time, we have to look at it and say, is it really our responsibility now that the EPR has been put in place? Provinces signaled that ultimately they respect the fact that recycling is the responsibility of the producers. And the producers really have to get on board and do this. And I would tend to think that where our responsibility should fall is to ensure that the province gets the appropriate feedback to know that they have to stay on top of this group, to ensure that they do what they should be doing to ensure that the producers are ultimately owning the responsibility for recycling their packaging and their materials. So that's kind of where I'm going with it right now. At some point in time, we have to step away from things that are not our responsibility any longer. And it looks to me like that's where we're going to end up. And if we want to play, in this thing, at some point in time, we're not washing our hands of a non-municipal responsibility. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from right now. But I'll listen to the rest of you and see what you have to say before I push the button in the final analysis. But I'm leaning towards the opt-out. So in that case, I wouldn't be supporting Councillor Abatoye's resolution.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blizzard.
I will support this motion. As I've listened to all the arguments, I really feel it's important for service continuity. It's not like we are paying extra for this. It's just we're not saving as much. And I realize, yes, there's a cost to that, but there's still, I think, important for us. When we changed service, that included when all this started with collecting organics years ago and changing to blue bags. There's a disruption no matter what. And I think with a brand new company and being province-wide, having all these communities, I think it's best if we manage our own, at least on the short term, see how things go, let them work out any issues. And then I still see our future as opting out eventually, but I think for now we should opt in and maintain our own service until this is all done. So I will support this motion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. Not saving as much is exactly the same as paying more. And I can't stress that enough. There's a cost to opt in, and on top of that, if we're part of the system, we're also responsible for part of the system, and the touch points in the system where friction can happen will exist, and then it'll be a question of whose responsibility is that. For instance, a contamination, like whose ultimate responsibility is that if we're part of the system? I agree with Councillor Harris that it is a provincial matter. I'm glad to see this, by the way. I get frustrated with the level of packaging that I see in some of the retail outlets. I find it actually offensive, and I'm optimistic that as the producers / retailers have to pay for this stuff, that they'll find better and more efficient ways to package their product. So I think there's some long-term gain to be had with a national or at least a provincial program, and I wholeheartedly support it. But I fail to see why we would want to be part of a COG when the mandate has been given provincially to a large organization. And I understand that there very well might be some hiccups. With respect, Janelle, you mentioned 7,500 potential 1%. It's 1/3 of that when we factor that down to just the blue bag. It's not 7,500. And that assumes a 1% failure rate. I think if in fact the blue bag has some issues, that it wouldn't be seamless, obviously, but we could arrange a drop-off point for the blue bags at the recycle depot, and the contractor would pick them up there for the points they've missed. So I think there's workarounds. It is just the blue bags. We're not handling stuff that decomposes in your backyard if it isn't picked up today. While it's a minor inconvenience, I stress it, it's just a minor inconvenience if there are problems. And I fail to see why, again, I'm going to repeat myself, but fail to see why would we want to be part of that COG at an additional cost. I think Councillor Harris hit it on the head. It's not our responsibility past a certain date, and I think the transition will happen smoother and faster and be more comprehensive if, in fact, they are responsible for all of the program that they are responsible for. So I'm not, and I cannot vote in favor of the motion as it sits. We will wait and see what happens and maybe get a second chance at this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Macon.
Thank you. Definitely at first I was leaning toward the opting out, but I do see the value in opting in to ensure the service level is maintained during what I guess I'll call a transitional period for circular materials. I do see us opting out in the future and realizing that cost savings, as Councillor Blizzard alluded to. So I will support the motion. I do see us opting out in the future. I like that has been mentioned. I do appreciate that this stuff will get moved to the province, where the responsibility lies. So, but for now, I do think that this is the best option for our community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harris, you have another question?
Well, there's 6 of us in the meeting today, and if it ends up in a tie vote, and then the motion that Councillor Abatoya put on the table fails, then where do we sit? So this is an interpretation I need to get from administration. What are we looking at then?
Okay, I'm going to go to our parliamentary. Andrew?
Yes, thank you. Through your worship to Councillor Harris, you are correct. A tie motion is a fail. And as administration needs definitive direction on this matter, we would ask that a second motion be put forward for the opt-out, and that would be voted on.
Okay, well, that ought to be interesting. I hope we don't end up in a nullity, in other words. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to, for parliamentary. So if both motions end up in a 3-3 tie, just hypothetically, then what?
It's to your worship, it's Schrodinger's motion. I would ask that we take a break, and I would go to Robert's Rules of Order, and perhaps we could theorize what would happen.
Okay, well, I'm just asking because under the alternatives, number 2, it says that council extend until phase 2 is implemented in 2026. I just looking for some direction before I have to cast my vote.
To your worship, I would maybe look to Ms. Miller for some direction with the understanding that we're working with a deadline. I don't really have a comprehensive understanding of what the alternatives are at this point if the decision is delayed or postponed.
Your worship, I think you've grasped the situation well. If we do not opt in or opt out by August 1st, then we are automatically shifted to the phase 2 EPR, which starts October 1st, 2026. So we will see no financial reimbursement until October 2026 if we don't make a choice today.
Okay, thank you. So I'm leaning towards the opt-out. I actually agree. We've gone through transition over the last 25 years with different systems. We've gone from weekly to bi-weekly, and it's not like the recycled items are smelly. You know, they sit on the side of the house or in the garage for 1 to 2 weeks. Sounds like... I agree. I'm not sure why it's our responsibility, and then we have to take on the audit of it. We have to take on additional insurance. We have to take on some additional staff, and we don't even know ourselves when that ends. And that's a concern to me. So I have more questions about why we would continue to do this. My biggest concern is if I vote no, it's a 3-3, and I'm okay with discussing the opt out and having that go to a motion and see if anybody can be influenced to go with that. But I do agree if it's something that we can give to the provincial government, what they're saying is they're taking on the responsibility. It's not like it's our smelly trash that we would have to worry about. So I'm not as worried about that. And, you know, I would hope that maybe they would consider using existing service providers, and then there would be very little disruptions. So I'm really leaning towards the opt-out because it just doesn't make sense to me, and I haven't been fully convinced. So I'm going to let debate continue here. Councillor Kelly?
Thank you. It would seem to me that the organization that's responsible provincially isn't going to reinvent the wheel on day one. There are only certain companies in the province that actually are equipped to handle this sort of material. And they're not going to go out and incorporate new companies. They're going to contract with the existing companies. I don't think there's any way they can operate otherwise. And nothing to suggest that we would get a brand new company in Fort Saskatchewan just because they thought that was better for us. Furthermore, GPS is a marvelous tool. All routing is done with GPS now on virtually everything, and new service providers, whoever they are, will have GPS routes. I firmly believe that. And I understand your concern about minimizing service disruptions. I get it. But that is you looking at the worst case scenario, because it's your job, and telling council we don't want any problems for our citizens. And it's me looking at it going, I want to save an additional $100 and some thousand in the coming budget year, because I know that the coming budget year is going to be very troubling for the city of Fort Saskatchewan. And every $100,000 means something. So I'm going to frankly, I don't see the benefit of opting in. I'm of the opt-out mind, and we'll see how this vote goes. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Abatoye on close.
Thank you. I believe that everything is not about cost. there are things that need to be considered when we're making decisions. And I know that EPR is something that's been worked on, I know, for so many years. I know Sadie and her team have worked on it for so long. And I'm so proud of the work you've done and, how far we've come. But I think more importantly, if we cast our minds back to the water wars, and that's what gave birth to Fort Reports, which is a customer service tool that we use in our community, showing that customer service is so important when you're dealing with residents of a community. And I think that's why I think the opt-in option is the best option model we should be going with, because, again, we are determining our destiny and making sure that our residents are taken care of. And then there's that flexibility to still, go forward with the opt-out option. And I agree with a lot of the comments that have been said. It's absolutely the province's responsibility, to take care of this. But it's also our responsibility to take care of our residents. And I think that the opt-in option does that for us temporarily. Until, we have that, I want to say 18 months, to be able to opt out. So I still hope that we can move forward with the opt-in option, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay, I know I said close, but I have to apologize. Councillor Harris had asked for another question or debate before I said close, and I didn't see it here. And I see Councillor Macon's back on, so we will come back to a second close. So go ahead, Councillor Harris.
I just need to touch base. So we have a contract with the provider. So if we were to pass the opt-out motion today, that contract would stay in effect until, and what's the date? That's sometime in 2028. So ultimately, we still have a financial responsibility of the contractor to do that, but there should be, I guess, some responsibility in that regard to the province in this regard. So reframe kind of where we're going to end up if we go with the opt-out clause. I just need to reframe that again in my mind.
Through your worship to Councillor Harris, we've actually positioned this current contract so that the recycling portion ends when the EPR regulation kicks in. So we can go either way. If we do go with the opt-in option, administration will extend the recycling portion of the contract to allow for that. If we choose opt-out, we would just leave it and circular materials would take over that agreement.
Okay, so in other words, we're not going to be in a situation where people are going to have to stick stuff in the black bin, which ultimately is garbage, which we have an ultimate responsibility for, and we always will. So it won't be in a situation where people will get frustrated and put stuff in black as opposed to blue, because there will be a blue option, one way or the other. Correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Macon.
Thank you. I do appreciate all the comments that were made, and I really do appreciate the value of the opt-out option. I really do. But I do think, preparing residents for this, preparing our community for this before we opt out is important. And they don't have to use our contractor. So there's nothing to say that this will be seamless or that they will re-sign up with the same contractor and everything will keep going. And I think if we look at the horror stories that were talked about and recycling doesn't get picked up for 2 or 3 months, that is going to be a major issue. And by the time it gets picked up, I'll probably wish we spent the $100,000 because it is going to cause a problem if that happens. And there's no saying that it's going to, but I don't know, when we change a big service level like this for an entire municipality from us to another service provider, I honestly do believe this transitional period will be worth it. So I continue to support opting in at this time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly.
It is conjecture that there will be a problem. And it doesn't help when we imagine the problem to be larger than it could probably ever be and suggest that it might be months without collection. That won't happen. It won't happen. And to offer that conjecture to council is of no benefit. This company has a mandate to collect the stuff. They will get paid when they collect the stuff, and if they mess it up that badly, there will be repercussions for them. And in the meantime, we will continue to collect the stuff. It's not the end of the world. So please, I'd like to suggest to council that we not imagine stuff that's not likely to happen, and that we restrict our comments to what we know. And what we know is that there has been a provider installed. And what we also know is that there are limited subcontractors within the province that either the city or that new provider can use. And they're not going to recreate the wheel just because they now have the contract. It's going to be the same truck driving through some city just like it was the day before. It's not a new fleet of drivers, not a new fleet of trucks, not a new anything, just a change in who manages. And hopefully better outcomes over the long term. So like I said, if this in fact gets to a split vote, I would ask council to be pragmatic when they offer their views for the next time around. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Macon.
I just want to clarify, Sadie, that one of the horror stories you did say was that a municipality had gone months without pickup.
Through your worship to Councillor Macon, that was the conversation, I would say early 2022, as Ontario was making transitions.
Sure, because that's what I heard. That is what I said it. And Circular Materials is under no obligation to use the contractor that's been here. The contract will be up and they can use whomever to come into our municipality, so it could be different trucks.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna, go back to Councillor Abatoye on a final close. Do you have anything for, oh, there you are. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, you know what? Let's vote.
Okay. All right, the motion is now closed. Please cast your vote. Motion is defeated, so I will go to another motion. Councillor Kelly, go ahead. Oops.
Give me 1 second to get it in front of me, please. Oh, good grief. I can't pop it up here for some reason. Do you have it? Yeah, I would move alternative, as presented, alternative number 1. My motion is that council direct administration to register the city of Fort Saskatchewan for the opt-out servicing model with Circular Materials for single-use products, packaging, and paper products under the Extended Producer Responsibility Program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And you wish to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I do. I don't personally see the negatives that I think other people perhaps imagine. I do look at the cost because I understand that if we spend $100,000 on Program A, that it's simply not available for Program B. And there is a very real cost, and there is potentially no limit to that new cost. I do think that whatever organization this is, they've had experience as they've grown this program or similar programs across the country. I fail to see why they would hire illiterate managers. I would imagine their managers do their very best, just like everybody else does. And I would expect that the learning curve improves with every new province they come to. And while I agree they have no obligation probably to hire another or the similar service provider, there are only a certain number of those service providers because they are all set up with individual contracts right now for every municipality, and that whole system is not about to change. There's not a new fleet of 1,000 trucks coming into Alberta on that particular day to take over the program. It's not going to happen. So I think we need to pass this one. I don't want to go to a break as much as I think we probably would have to if we stumble here. So I would encourage at least one member of council to give this some thought and determine whether or not it's really important, important enough to stall it further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On discussion and debate, Councillor Blizzard.
Okay, I'm going to ask, I guess, Sadie or Janelle to go over what happens again, just to make sure we're all clear on this, if this is voted down. Right now, if we had opted in, it's a $260,000 a year savings. If we opt out, it's a $400,000 a year savings. If we do nothing, can you explain again what's going to happen?
Through your worship to Councillor Blizzard, if we do nothing today, there is no cost savings realized until October 2026.
Okay, well, since this motion is made, I'm going to listen to the rest of council if anyone has any other discussion, but I am not willing to not have some savings. So I will support this motion unless I see somebody else. I am not for it. I'm going to be clear on that, but I will vote that way because I feel that we need to do one or the other to save the municipality some money. It would be a total waste to make no decision and not have any of the savings and just be at whatever mercy we're at.
Okay, thank you. Motion is still on the floor for discussion and debate. Let me check Councillor Harris quick. You're not seeing anything. Councillor Kelly on close.
Nothing further.
Councillor Harris,
I sent you a note.
Oh, it did. Oh, okay, it didn't come through. Go ahead. Sorry.
I think I asked the question earlier, what other municipalities are doing, and not to follow the crowd, but to set the agenda. If we do that today, there is no doubt in my mind that other municipalities will probably look at the same discussion that we've had. They probably won't be in a tie vote situation, so then hopefully it's a definitive decision. But I really think that we will be setting some leadership agenda here relative to this particular file. It is a sunk cost one way or the other. We're going to be picking up material until we have to, and then it's somebody else's. Well, it is somebody else's responsibility as it is right now. So I really think that opting out is the only way to go right now to show the leadership, and then we can continue to have those discussions to ensure that other municipalities are in the same situation and make similar decisions so that we force the province to do something that they should be doing with their service provider. So that's my thought on this thing. And Councillor Blizzard, I understand your predicament and your thought process. So I think we need to make a decision to move forward, and I hope this motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly, you said nothing further on close?
Correct.
Okay, motion is now closed as presented for the opt-out. Please cast your vote. Motion is carried. Thank you very much. All right, because it's a special meeting, nothing for confidential. So with that, I will declare the meeting is adjourned at 11:13. Thank you very much.